The surplus property law.
Yeah, but we did talk about that,
Which
as an indication.
It's not the clearest piece of legislation ever to
And there was like 4 pieces of legislation that all had impact on that.
Mhm. Yeah, and so what I'm looking at, the good thing though is the Senate Bill 4747 includes, I think it was Assembly Bill 481 or whatever. So it presumed that it was getting approved along with it. So it has the language, I think, from that one already in it when I was looking at it. But there are some exemptions for certain kinds of leases. What's not really and they're actually clearly stated, but what's not clear is the timing, because I think this legislation goes into effect in 2024 or January 1st, 2024. So it's really for leases starting there. And they confirmed that a 15-year lease is okay. There was nothing in the prior law that talked about the length of the lease, and HCD had taken it upon themselves to decide that anything over 5 years could be potentially subject to being required to be surplused. And so
That's a good thing then.
the good thing is this legislation clarified and gave you 15 years. But all that being said, that doesn't really address the issue that we have, because under the rules only apply to property that the city has surplused and is disposing of, and leasing is now considered a component of disposal. But what's not clear is what we can consider agency use and therefore not subject to surplus. They do, the legislation spends a lot of time outlining various categories of, if they do give you examples of agency use, but they say it's including it but not limited to that, which is good for us because I think that arguably our license agreements fall into agency use. We are making a determination, by virtue of providing these types of arrangements, license agreements to our nonprofits, that's basically an extension of agency use because they're doing something that we believe is consistent with our powers and for the community benefit. So that would be the argument I would make, is that they're not even subject to being surplus. Now we have to be careful because some of our things that we have when we're leasing property that works for our, these licenses or leases, like we're going to talk about the next one, it's a lease. But it won't necessarily work for, they don't want you doing things for development. If it's for or redevelopment, that's all considered commercial type enterprise, anything related to that. Even if we were trying to make a finding that it's somehow, consistent with the city's powers, they've made a determination that is something that, so those are the leases. I think that they're really looking at those kinds of leases where somebody's deriving personal, private economic benefit. Okay. So anyways, I just wanted to, and I'm grossly simplifying this because it is like 30, 40 pages of fine print. So, but any rate, I just wanted, so I don't think that we have to worry about it so much with the licenses we've already agreed to. Like Commission or, because theirs is longer term. In fact, theirs may even be over 15 years because they wanted 20 years. There's also, by the way, a complete exemption for leases to individuals where absolutely no development is taking place on the property. No demolition or development. So if you are leasing or licensing a vacant structure where no changes are going to be made to it, doesn't matter who you're leasing it for. It doesn't matter how long you're doing it for or for how long it is. So that's a benefit too. Our problem is we allow for improvements to be made in a lot of our license agreements. So we should be, but I would say that again, not even subject to it for most of them, because they're, like I said, they're nonprofits and we're looking at them from providing a service that we could otherwise provide, but they're doing it instead. Right.
And
so
I imagine some of that is just the preserves. Because there's a lot of that goes on tracks.
Right. Well, but they're explicitly exempt anyways. A lot of, they added a lot of exemption, like specific exemptions. Although you're right, for cities, I think it's more for districts that only do that. There's like an exemption. And then there's an exemption for airport property, for public airport property. And then there's there's very explicit. And then there's one for, some specific type of district. I can't remember what it is now, like transportation districts. I think that's what it was. So where that is your sole purpose is for transportation, but it's weird. They didn't give cities, they gave it to a district, but they may believe it's otherwise covered because cities already have those powers. And so you can do those kinds of arrangements under quote agency use. You're never at the point where you're actually considering that property surplus. So anyway, this is all new legislation, so it'll get defined. And so it's possible that what I'm telling you could change, but right now that would be my impression of looking at
So the
way the
implication
law
then
works.
to the fair, who would be one of two things. So either looking for expansion or acquisition for.
I think it makes it acquisition maybe a little bit more difficult, but I think we'd have to really look at how to because I don't know. I mean, we have
to find if it's exempt.
we have to find out if they're, well, number one, is that what they want to do? Are they ready to buy it? If they could, have we talked to them?
Potential.
Do we know? Yeah. I mean, I think we need to find that out and then we can look and see how that would work and if we need to, if we'd have to go through surplusing or if we can find an exemption for that. So certainly I think that it helps us with the long-term lease aspect.
And then maybe in other matters because of another conversation as it relates to, does the state have its own in addition to that because of the armory conversation?
The armory, so that is actually, I flagged it. That's covered in here too. I think that, but it's a weird exemption and it has to do with really large army bases. So I don't know. They should know their own rules, how they apply to themselves.
So what
yeah,
maybe in other matters we can talk about. I can update the committee on conversations with the military department and real estate office.
Yeah, I was going through, but there's a whole list of exemptions and I'll have to find them. Like I said, it was a long piece of legislation, but they actually call those out as an exemption. But then I was reading it further in, and the exemption appeared to be for really large pieces of property, like basically bases. Which really, then why? I mean, to me, why make the distinction? It just seems so silly to me. But I'll look at it more.
It's in the reuse plans, like in
yeah. Well, and yeah.
What's the one up in Marina?
Which one?
By Marina.
Oh, I don't remember which one that is. All I can think of is the Naval Training Center in San Diego. They went through that. The NTC down in Point Loma.
There's a former base up by Marina.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of it.
John Huntley would talk about it all the time. It was right next to Marina, and they were involved in the reuse
plan of it. Well, and there's also there's an exemption for, that's the other thing. So contractual obligations that are already in existence as of September 30th, 2019 are fine. It must have something to do with when they started monkeying around with the surplus property law. So they've grandfathered, but only prior to that. Well, I mean, there's ENAs. ENAs are now protected, right? Because people were having an exclusive negotiating agreement, but we don't have any of those to my record. So none of that applies to us. Right. Right. So we don't have that. So that doesn't affect us because that was a problem. They had some that had basically were affected by changes in surplus property rules that said you couldn't do them. They were basically invalidated. And now they've been revalidated by virtue of the passing of the legislation, but it doesn't apply to us from what I understand. So anyways, okay.
So we'll carry it over and bring more stuff back on.
So with that in mind, we need to consider all those things and find out. I think the big thing is we need to find out what does the fair want to do, and then we can see if we can get them there.
Okay. So we're moving right along, review of the TSW lease agreement.
Okay, so I did not have it ready for the agenda, but I had it ready for today, for discussion today. What I did is I took the Centennial Plaza lease, because that was actually when I went back to see what was the most recent lease that we've comprehensively done. It was back in 2018.
Yeah.
So I took a look at that, added a few things, added the CASP language, which we'd have to confirm with Javier whether he's looked at it or whether we're going to say that we aren't looking at it for the sheltered workshop property.
Or we can explicitly say we haven't.
That's what I said right now. I'm assuming we haven't.
We have not.
Okay, thank you. So this is, so what I did is I looked at what we had actually in the lease agreement, and then I looked at our current comprehensive one and kind of put them together. So there wasn't a whole lot different other than obviously the amount of the lease. What are we going to charge them? I'm presuming that we're going to make, if we're charging them very little like we were before, that we're going to have them be on the hook for any and all improvements and repairs and maintenance and you paying all the utilities, all that stuff. So that's how it's written. The term has been left blank for now. I'd recommend that. And here's the thing, we may not want to start this until after January
Okay.
and have it go for no more than 15 years, just if we wanted to be on the safe side. Theirs is a little bit different because it is a lease. They're a business, but I think they're technically a nonprofit corporation. I looked them up. They still utilize technically the name Porterville Sheltered Workshop, by the way. They
Yeah.
haven't changed it with the state. So to promoting self-worth, it's not on record. I checked it.
Huh.
So probably doing it isn't also known as, is what I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
'cause it happened-
Or a
it was state-
DBA.
It was a state law that required that they given. I remember hearing, so there was state law, because they fall in that category of agencies that provide work experience for.
Right, under the Welfare and Institutions Code.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and they are nonprofit, but they couldn't call themselves that given. Public identification as. There were more egregious examples, so.
Oh. The only other one I know of is Able Industries.
Well, which. I don't know what that stood for, but in Bakersfield, we had Bark.
Oh,
If you remember Bark?
Yep.
So Bakersfield area.
oh, right.
Is what they
Yeah.
call it. And so they had to change their name. And so similarly, if there was not, you couldn't have anything in your name to identify that you were working with. That's why they went to promoting. So-
Right. Right. So, yeah, so I think that they haven't changed their nonprofit filings. So I went with the legal name of the entity for now.
Okay, for right now.
I looked up promoting self-worth. It's not showing up anywhere. At least it wasn't coming up in the business search. Sheltered Workshop comes up as active in the business search. So I'm presuming they're just utilizing it and they've probably filed. I'm guessing that the state just required them to have a DBA. So they probably filed a DBA, which is done at the county level. So they might've done that. But it doesn't really matter. If they want to add in also known as or something, we can. That's up to them.
How are the agreements with you, Don? Is it promoting self-worth?
I think they did change their invoices now and stay PSW, I think at the top there.
This says PSW.
So this is the draft. Is this something that?
You know what? I could have checked PSW, although I doubt that that's what they've
You mentioned
registered
something
under.
else you have to review.
Well, it has to do with language with CAPS, and we
Okay.
dealt with this with the
Okay.
Kiwanis. So we're saying we're not doing that.
Right.
So, but we're leaving them that it's subject to their own,
Okay.
Mhm.
right? That's essentially what we're not taking oversight of CAPS.
Right. What we basically say is that we have not inspected it, that they can request it, but it would be at their expense. That's
Okay.
really basically in a nutshell what it says.
And that's what we did with Kiwanis.
Yeah,
Right.
I just use the same language from Kiwanis.
Okay.
So I don't allow them to assign or sublet without our consent, which can be withheld for any reason. That would be my recommendation. There's annual adjustment language in here for the CPI, but if they're paying very little, it's not going to matter, but I just put it in because it's standard language. And that way we have the ability if we need to. The allowed uses, I don't know if we want to be specific. It was not specifically referenced. We other than we say for charitable purposes, but that may be something we want to consider. Do we want to consider putting something in that's like they need to tell us what their plan is for it and then stick to it? It might be a good idea to at least have it somewhat formalized as to what they want to put in there.
I would recommend if we're gonna put something, to put, allow uses that are allowed within the zoning or, you know what I mean? Something of that nature,
Charitable uses consistent with city, with their purposes. And
Yeah, with the-
city,
Zone.
laws and city laws and regulations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
That way it gives them flexibility, but it's not like it's.
that's fine. And then the prohibited uses are just our typical ones, things that would increase our insurance, things that would violate or the law or constitute waste or public nuisance on the premises. Like I said, with maintenance, repair and upkeep, they would be on the hook for all of that. We'd have the ability to either consider the stuff that their improvements part when we get to alterations, anything they would do, if we allow them to, obviously they should get our permission first. At the time that they can either take it with stuff, there are certain things they could take with them, otherwise it becomes property of ours, like those kind of standard language that we also included in the Centennial Plaza lease. They cover utilities and taxes or any applicable taxes.
On the alteration permitted, do we outline with that permission process?
Let me see here. What did I
Just so
say?
you know, how we wanna, that's something that we could have like on some of the agreements, Donnie has the ability to approve alterations. Or if that's something that.
I just said that we would be notified in writing before any alterations, additions, or improvements are undertaken by lessee. All such alterations, additions, improvements will be at their sole expense. Any improvements on said property should be not be placed as to interfere with water drainage from that property. This was specific language to the prior one, this last part. Any improvements on said property shall not be placed as to interfere with water drainage from that property lying to the north of the demised premises, and having done business as United Lumber Yards. Is it still United Lumber Yards? That was my big question. Do we want to state what it is? Because I know it also said it was owned by James Winton, and I knew that was no longer the case.
Yeah.
So,
That's the housing project now.
okay.
What?
Philistine.
Philistine project.
So we should probably just say currently known as, what is it? Villa Sienna?
Villa Sienna. Before we have them done.
Or yeah, or you want to maybe more, but
Multifamily housing.
or you know, adjacent development, or if you would be more broad, you know what I mean?
I can just say line to the north of the demised premises.
Right.
I have just no idea what, okay, that's fine.
I mean,
Yeah, so this was, when this was entered into, it was a vacant piece of property to which it was developed.
Right.
so there has been some issues there in the past. We've seen from some, but PSW has been really great about working these up through it, about parking vehicles, because people weren't able to see if they're exiting that multifamily
Mm-hmm.
project, but PSW took corrective action
Okay.
and
And then it also says that they won't place any improvements on property that will interfere with the existing easement of the gas line or pipe owned by or under the control of Southern Calabasin. So I didn't put a lot in there. We can definitely put more in there if you guys think we need it. It was just our standard language. We're not really limiting the improvements they make as long as they come to us first. I don't know if there's any concerns with that, so.
On procedure.
Or on just substance, how do we feel about that? Do you want to allow that? I mean, they could pretty much do anything according to what we put there. So. Not that they're going to necessarily want to invest in it and when they know that they're just renting, but.
I think it's good. They've used this property for many years.
Yeah.
So to our community, it's gonna be good to see where it's at. So
Okay.
on our side, I think we work through it on what the process would be.
Yeah.
Something.
They do have to get all governmental permits, of course. We have the ability to inspect the work carried out. And then, like I said before, all alterations, additions, improvement signs, awnings, blah, blah, blah. Provided, you know what? I'm taking out any references to subtenants since we're not allowing them.
In reference to the prior conversation, with this, and given already what was believed to be as an oral history that had been acquired in the past, what would be as an alternative to this if they wish to acquire the property?
Well, if they wish to acquire it, we'd have to determine its surplus. That triggers us having to determine its surplus, which then triggers us having to do the notification for affordable housing, which makes me a little nervous if it's already next door to affordable housing, because somebody may decide that it would be a good expansion of the current housing project that's there. So they would not be guaranteed. They'd have, I mean, we could say, hey, we can do
No, I
this.
just
And if
raised
nobody brings up this issue of wanting to do this, then we can provide it to you as, then we can provide it to you at appraised value, presuming that nobody wants it for affordable housing.
But it
Right.
does.
Or open space.
I just raise it from a
Yeah.
transparency standpoint and already on a false assumption that it had been, 40 years ago
Mhm.
acquired. And obviously that through the title stuff, we didn't show.
Right. There's this.
It was an oral history that wasn't correct.
Yeah.
Or at least has been not been demonstrated to be correct.
That we just gave it to them. That must have had to been right, because we would have also had a monetary transaction.
But we
which-
don't,
No record
there's
of.
no record of.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a long time ago, huh?
Yeah. So, anyway, so. Yeah, they'd have to, theoretically, they could remove things, but if they don't, and if they do, they'd have to repair it back to the way it was. They're not going to do that. It'll end up just becoming ours, but that
Right.
we give them
Okay.
those options. The insurance, I did raise it to 2 million because that is our standard. And I'm sure they probably have it. And otherwise it's our standard language. It's just really, the rest of it is, what happens if the premises are destroyed? It just includes your typical standard lease language. I don't think it'll be anything earth shattering. It has an indemnity clause. Again, our standard, it's actually mutual. We do mutual indemnity for, with regard to our particular things.
How many still there?
I have no
I
idea.
believe so. I know Judge Roper is also on the board.
Mhm. There's termination for cause, notices. It's very standard. Everything else is really standard. And really not a lot, nothing is made any super different than what was in the prior one. It just is updated. So if you guys are good with this, we can transmit it to them and say, hey, what do you guys want to do? We'd recommend let's just keep things as is until January, and then we could put it on for January. That gives them time to review it.
To reach out would be good, and then go ahead. Yeah, I'm good with this. Vice Mayor, you good with this?
I'm good, and I like the timeline too.
Me too.
I mean, we can go, we're doing a month to month under our very old current one, which is fine.
I like
Okay.
I also like the responsibilities laid out, so it's clear. In case
Yeah.
they don't have.
Are you good with this, Maria?
We would just need to decide, are we going to still provide it to them at $1 a year? That's the big thing. Really, that's the big question. So we should go ahead. If we want to keep it the same, we can. That's up to you.
That's been the most common.
Yeah.
The one that was different is
Like the $10?
the commission rate, which is $10.
I was saying something about market rate. I told them that too.
Wow. The public member raises it on you.
Do you have any questions, Rob?
No, they did sell seeds candy for a couple.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
I do have an axe to grind.
Yeah. We forgot to add the Stafford's clause in here.
It didn't work out. We'll see. We all learn from our mistakes.
Okay,
Strike that.
All right, so I guess we'll, and I think Ron Killingsworth probably is the contact on that, I believe. He's on their business.
I could follow on, dude.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. And if they want to talk to their attorney, then Alan can call me.
How he wants the process.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I imagine he's gonna have you talking about it.
So I'll update this though before you send it over to the $1 a year or whatever,
Okay.
which could be increased by the CPI every year.
Did you say candy or do you wanna like? Kind of
Make it permissive.
Yeah, so like it doesn't have.
Well,
Yeah, I
don't
think
know
I
that
did.
None of ours have that, and this would be the only one that has.
It's because this is a lease and not a license. So I'm using the standard lease language, which tends to be more
Yeah.
set up that way, right?
Okay.
That's typically what you do to
Yeah,
So,
We could take it out
so
though.
let's come back
We
to
can take it out
that
if you guys want.
with just hold on to that, but given the conversation with the military department, because
Yeah.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on to the next one, review process for the city community civic events.
yeah, so if you don't mind, Eureka and myself have been working on this a little bit. Eureka's been doing a lot of research in regards to, recently we've seen in our community that there's been more special events that have been occurring and been requesting city council approval. These special events are coming under the community civic event, but they aren't a true community civic event in its fashion. So we started doing some research about what other communities are doing. We are not unique in this, and Mr. Wallace has expressed this about how they're having this in Visalia and Tulare and other communities throughout the valley. Well, in doing research, we also found that this is throughout the state is occurring as well. So locally, we found first we take one step back. A community civic event is sponsored by a nonprofit. So traditionally, we would think of these events are events essentially like the Chamber of Commerce puts on. So like they used to have the Iris Festival, and now they have a Spring Festival or a parade that is sponsored by a nonprofit. Oftentimes is sponsored also by a municipality, right? Like a Veterans Day parade or these things. So these events that are occurring they're on city property, either like in a parking lot or in a park or in the streets that require a closure and a use of public space to be restricted from others for private use. So we would deem that more a special event. So the city of San Luis Obispo, the city of Stockton, and the city of Lindsay have processes for this. So we wanted to kind of just introduce the ideas of this. One of the things that we like about San Luis Obispo, specifically, as you know, San Luis Obispo has a lot of special events, and they outline pretty much all of their properties through this process and kind of have a price tag on what that would be. But that to me is not the important part. The important part is process and how it's established. Also is the definition. So I know city attorney and I were talking about this before on the community civic event. Really definitions mean things. So one of their definition is a special event is any organized activity that involves an impact upon public property, sidewalks, parks, or streets in a manner that varies from its current land use or requires a permit. These events may include weddings, festivals, athletic events, fundraisers, concerts, public assemblies, or any organized formation, parade, procession, or assembly consisting of persons, animals, vehicles, or any combination thereof, traveling in unison, the common purpose on public street, highway, alley, sidewalk, public way, which is not compliant with normal use of traffic regulations and controls. So most of these incorporate in one application a community civic event and a special event.
And you just check a
You
box.
just check a box.
Mhm.
So, kind of wanted to talk to the committee today, and see a little bit of direction of how we'd like to maintain our current process and have a separate process, or look to adopt a new process or new application, as it were, which when someone checks a box, if you check this box, you go down this process. If you check the no box, it's on private, you know what I mean? If it's you are a nonprofit or a community civic event, it goes one way. If it's a special event, it goes through another process.
So my big question is, are those events limited in any way, like number wise, the special events, or does it just depend by jurisdiction?
So some of them have it has broken down. So they'll have like a class 1, class 2, class 3. Class 1 will be for this many people, class 2, and then the fees are also determined on that. So it's broken down by the amount of, or how big the event is supposed to be.
In regard to the number of times someone can do it in a year, I didn't see in any of the applications.
But they charge a fee and they figure that'll be
So we
yeah.
had seen, we saw City of Lindsay prior charged a $1,500 deposit. They since,
They just.
they just said they just changed that. But they have fees and they require, majority of them require a minimum of 90 days processing time. And if you submit something that is outside of that or outside of that 90 days, so shorter than 90 days, there is a penalty. Usually it's the similar cost. It's like $50 to penalty for that application and process it in a shorter time span. Julia will give you copies of these. We have copies for everybody of these, but thought it was interesting how others do it. I'm not sure how they derived at the cost. Many of them have, just like how we have for our parks rentals, the fee is different for different parking lots and things of that nature. And so we would have to look at legally how.
Well, you have to tie it to the
Right.
services on or the cost that the city's incurring.
And so
For
some of these, like I said, had deposits. Others like you had to pay for the services. I mean, it's all recurring about how you as the city to not incur the cost of a private event. You know, if it were to be a wedding, for instance, the municipality and the taxpayer shouldn't bear the cost for somebody's wedding.
Well, Lindsay did a food study, and I think they associated the fee for that. So they had a list of all the employees, how much their rate of pay was. Depending on which employee has to respond to that application, they would just charge this employee worked an hour on it, that employee worked an hour on it.
Right.
And
That would make sense. How much time does it take to process the application? What are the resources? What's the estimate on the resources that are going to be needed for the event itself from the city?
If they require.
So it's a combination of that. What are you needing, right? You know, all that is going to change the cost potentially.
Then I believe Fresno also charges, so some events, require, public safety to be present.
Okay.
Some of these.
Right. Yeah. If you have public safety there, and you have to figure out what that cost is too. Yeah.
And not knowing, I say that just as a broad scale, not knowing what that event would be.
Well, then typically you're not going to have public safety if it's not associated with either, and it would have to be somewhat associated with the public. You shouldn't be doing public safety for a wedding, for example.
Right. But if it was a large special.
But you could
event,
require security, private security, and that they do that. Yeah.
anyhow, that's our report.
And all the examples have to, like, whether the require police activity or so all the applications are very similar what they ask for. And I think depending on what they need will determine on there's the price. And then some of them too, they have committees. So I guess if it's between like a class 1 and class 2, the committee will decide, but if it's a class 3, that has to be taken to council. So I think it's also going on.
Which is kind of nice because then it doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to go to council.
Right.
Correct. And so that would.
Unless they want everything to go to them.
Of,
Yeah.
Does the city council desire to approve all of these, approve every special event if you go down this path, or do they want somebody else to have that authority to a certain extent? All in process.
You had information you wanted to pass out to us?
Yes. So
So the fees would apply to the special events.
excuse me.
The fees would apply to special events.
Well, however the council would like. I mean, these had fees associated with all of them. Yes.
It's a sound. This is-
So, did you break them down the whole staff?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
So I guess an important definition here, and I can just share it from the conversation that I had with my colleagues on this issue. So you have community civic events, which are generally invitations to the community to get together. There may be vendors, you know,
Oh, gotcha.
like a parade will have vendors, they'll have, the chamber will do an event, that has vendors, but they're community-based. And then there's others that may not have vendors, but it would bring community awareness. And I'll use Family Crisis Center, just had theirs last week, which I don't think had vendors, but it was a matter of bringing community awareness to prevention of domestic violence. And there's not a entry.
It's open, it's
it's
free
open
to
to
the
the-
public. At least entry is free to the public.
Well, then you have, you have businesses that wish to have an event that benefits the businesses, but want, so it's kind of in reverse. It's the business wants to do something, but then have a certain amount of the proceeds go to benefit a nonprofit. And in its use of, I mean, the purpose of the event is to make money for the business. It's not a community, it's not to support the nonprofit.
There might be a side portion that is for benefiting the community, but there's
Correct, but in
also a
the end,
primary
really
purpose for
just
the
a
benefit
private,
of the business.
it's a private business doing business on public property.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to, and we had a conversation about, this has been some of the conversation on post-COVID of outdoor dining permits. Which no longer are you can have indoor dining, but you continue to do.
Well, that was done under kind of like an emergency situation.
Right, but it's no longer there, but, and so you've seen that unwinding of that in your coastal communities especially.
You've also seen where some have figured out ways to go ahead and keep it.
And so,
Yeah.
so actually it was a good conversation. Tulare, as an example, they've said there's going to be certain things that the city's going to commit its resources to, its parades, it's saying, yes, we will provide X. Yeah, and then the other side of it, and they're not really charging a huge fee. I think they've made it standard for everything. So it's $25. So it's a processing fee. But if it's not something that the city is dedicating its resources, then you have to provide those things at your cost. So as an example, so if there's an event, if they have an event that a business is wishing to do that's not one of the parades and one of their community events, but they say, but we want to do this, great. You can contact KRC to bring in according to, so instead of the city mobilizing its staff to protect, bring in protection barriers, you need to go talk to KRC and get a traffic plan put together that meets our interests. Again, it's just 25, it's a processing fee. Here at the city of Porterville, we have no charge for this, and we process it. Staff processes it. And I guess this is really the question for the city attorney. So I guess the differentiation, we are not charging this. And so you have those that are non-profit, which the basis of
we're
this
not
is
charging, we have to provide it for a public purpose, right?
Right. And what is emerging is the private purpose.
It's the graying of the area.
Right. And so the way that Tulari's, I'm not saying that, just the approach that they've taken is that we're going to treat everybody the same, but there's going to be certain things the city's going to say, yes, we are going to provide personnel and support for. Anything else you're going to provide it yourself to our satisfaction.
Right.
So it may be security, it could be traffic control, whatever it is, it's at your cost. And you can do it, because we're not going to expend.
Which frankly, you can technically require the nonprofits to do it. It's just that we know that affects their ability to, because it falls under they can do that as part, they can pay for whatever it costs for their operations for a fundraiser. But we are able to say, okay, we can make a public purpose finding with regard to that particular donated resource or funding that goes towards your project. We can't do that with a private, because now we have a gift of public funds problem, which is against the Constitution. So,
and on these two, they have various different use of public property and on private property. And I like that. So we currently use a temporary use permit for these special events on private property, but it's very limited. We really limit it to festivals, we call it festivals.
You're looking at the effects of
Right.
it off
So-
the private property.
Correct, and so
Right.
we really limit what that special event could be. For example, you can't necessarily have, it wouldn't fall in line to have a wedding on this as a temporary use permit. It doesn't fall in our categories of something that can be approved. Now, if, do I necessarily think that there's going to be a horrific, like, negative impact if, say, a restaurant had a large parking lot and they wanted to have an outdoor wedding and they went through a permitting process and they accounted for parking and noise and timing? It may not be if it's in a zoned area that is commercially zoned. And I would say in a residential area, probably you'd have a lot of concerns with the neighbors, but in a commercial area, it may be something that's on a temporary basis. Our current process does not allow for that.
Oh, so we just don't, they can't even do
We
it.
can't even do it. So a lot of these, like this Alice different one, one of the questions on the application is where the property is located, you want to use, is it public or private? And that also kind of is in that evaluation of.
But it sounds like San Luis Obispo is more inclined, as long as you get the permission of the property owner, wherever you're
Yes.
holding it, they're more inclined to allow you to do it on private property, as long as you've got permission and you've dealt with whatever the effects.
Yes,
The
as
public
long as
effects.
you have permission from the property owner and that you have a plan in place and that you show that you're not gonna have any impact on your neighbors. Which a lot of times is the goal of that application, that you want a lot of people to utilize.
It would
that.
broaden it. The nice thing is the benefit to the community is it actually potentially expands the ability to do some things that we wouldn't, or we aren't otherwise allowing right now.
Correct.
I mean, they're categorized as special event permit, so you get a permit for it versus this is a community civic event, so it's a different type of. I don't like where it says, like, that it's required, so you can just get the permit to approve it and not necessarily require staff or anything else. But then there's also where it does require staff, but then there's a fee for it, so they're not just, giving away
Right.
employee time for
Right.
a private event.
Vice Mayor?
Just looking through the examples.
know.
I think the Lindsay one, so far, I like the breakout of the different classes because it kind of, identifies.
For me, this one, I looked at this one right away.
I like that piece of it with the different classes. And then I also like what Jason said earlier about having a box. I don't know if that would be more work or if it helps the staff to actually process if you're this, you go in this direction, you process a certain way. I think also making it clear so that when people and businesses are using the forms, it's clear for them to go through the process. I always like the checklist that the staff goes through and provides feedback, like the one in the last council meeting. I think those are always clear that, what, if there was recommendations, what they were, because it gives you time to fix those if possible. So far that's, just looking at skimming through these.
Yeah, if you go up the city of Scott, for example, that one on the first page, it'll say, is there organization able to file over and see, for you're gonna say yes or no, and then it has all the questions that happen.
And then there's pricing, there's like a link to pricing information for San Luis Obispo, as I noticed.
So when I went to that link, it essentially was their rental prices for all cities.
Oh,
That's a good point. I was, so for example, the use of city facilities, it's frequent that we have it a policy that nonprofits and government agencies can use city property without charge, but if a private entity, and from time to time we have it where somebody wants to use it for depositions. Trying to think of what other. We've had some minor private business, like lawyers want to use it for depositions. That's the one that I remember. There was some depositions, or court case I was taking there. So we have, our facilities are free of use to nonprofits for community meetings and governmental. So we've had
Army Corps.
the county, state of California have had.
We can continue this item too and have a further discussion.
No, this was really just as another matter, is to start bringing the conversation.
I
and
think
developing
it's
it.
needed.
Yeah.
Well, we need to
Thank
have
you
a
for bringing-
conversation, yeah, because in the San Luis Obispo, one, I also like it here, the event type. Under the check, because it's actually just asking, what type of event it is.
And so that's, like I said, and
Yeah, we'll need to look at them and have more discussion on it because yeah. Good information, what you've given us. At least it's a start.
Well, and you can let you see how other communities are
Yeah.
doing this, and then you can find how you wish to. I do think the council was looking for a process to be brought to differentiate between
Yeah, yes, yeah.
the traditional community civic events. And again, it's just not Porterville, it's also happening, Visalia is updating their community civic event process, Farmersville is. So.
Interesting. And what it's not clear is how much, to what extent they allow public parking lots to be used. Which is kind of interesting, at least Slows doesn't, I don't know, maybe.
Okay.
they're all fairly similar.
Do they talk about how you close the main street? So that is one of the major things. So Larry doesn't really have a main street, I guess.
No.
You want to see?
They don't really have that.
San Luis,
But, so Farmersville Boulevard, Main Street in Visalia,
and then here's something.
the highway, but it's unique in Woodlake because it's a highway. So you gotta do with
Yeah.
Caltrans to close stuff there. But anyway, and that's come up about. closing
Lindsay
it.
kind of has that.
It just
issue
says,
too.
John, that we have to provide a traffic control plan. To follow it. So if it's gonna close the rights of way, then a traffic control plan is required, Main Street closures, verticals.
We could look it up to see if there's an ordinance. They may have ordinances that aren't evident from these applications too in the cities.
So we were just working on this and wanted to start the conversation.
But a lot of their websites, on there, it does have if you need a permit here, if it's gonna require street closure, click here. So I mean, all of that is really, they do have really user-friendly websites, which I really like. You can apply online, it takes applications people have reviewed it, or you can just fill it out, print it out, and then bring it in. So it's
Yeah,
easier to read, but they do have that on their work. It'll say if you're gonna close the street, I think, slow this.
Yes.
And then it takes you to that department, and then you have to work with the police department or whatever to figure out how you're gonna.
One of the things that a lot of you are aware, we're much more connected. In a lot of cities, we really try not to be siloed. So a lot of our processes are connected. So I'll recommend whatever we do, continue that. But yes, I think that would be one of the major things is what that process looks like. Currently, our process, any street closure besides an emergency, which is ordered by the chief of police or the fire chief, requires council opinion.
Yeah, I think for me,
No, you go
Okay.
ahead.
I'm just putting some notes as we're talking, and listening. I think looking at that, some kind of guidance around or examples, I guess, of when a main street is requested to be closed. And then looking at a fee schedule, if we are gonna incorporate cost, determining how that will be done. Like, I think that assessment is good to kind of have a way to track that. And then a timeline. So Porterville's is 30 days,
60 days.
60.
60 days is a heck
I
of
thought it was 30. It's 30 then.
30 days. Oh, okay.
And then this, I think the Lindsay one example is 90.
90 days.
Slows is 60.
I mean, I think looking at how that works for us now and, the thing I don't like when they come in, I feel bad, you know, when they come in and there's not, it's like it feels like sometimes when the council gets it, we're like rushing. I know that all those discussions and recommendations, checklists have all been done, but I think does the timeline need to be extended, or are we good and just people need to be open?
A lot of these varied from 90 to 60 days and require that extra funding we provided is going to be expedited. One other thing that I just want to make note of, in many of these applications, it's noted that the event shall not be advertised.
Oh, yeah,
After approval is.
Yes.
submitted.
Yep.
and that's.
One of them recommended to be not, but the other one actually said shall not. So that's been a point of contention over the years, so that may be something we could go further in that.
I agree. I don't think that's good for anybody.
No.
Good for them.
Someone said,
City or the.
But yeah, Stockton says going on.
We can take the pieces that everybody likes to know when.
Okay. I think this will be brought back to us for the next one as well.
We'll make it there.
Okay, then we'll go into other matters. We've done anything up.
Yeah, so we're in the throes of this license agreement with the military department, which the person that we were working with, her name is Monica, is no longer she was on special assignment. And so there's now somebody that was from Department of General Services who's out, they call her a senior agent, is now over the military department handling all of theirs. And she goes, it shouldn't have been a license, it should have been a lease. And coordinating with Department of General Services. So there's some things that happen from the military side, state side, that didn't really follow form, I guess is what I'm saying. So there's a matter of trying to kind of
Correct it.
correct it. So so there's a new senior agent for real estate affairs for the overseas armories, who came from the Department of General Services, who handles all of the real estate matters. And so she's really just an agent to try to work with DGS. So we're in the process of doing that. So, but this also gets to,
I always wondered about that. Remember when I said, why are we giving them the ability to walk in at any moment? Like, it's like we're using it and they can just come in.
yeah, so in any event, very helpful. And so I just raised this because there's going to be the current license agreement we have right now goes through, I think, May 5th. As we continue to operate it as a temporary evacuation point for the shelter. And so that goes until May, well, it's subject to the city council continuing to operate it as that, but the license that we have allows it until May, I think, first week of May. In any event, trying to work on a new lease that would have language subject to disposition. And that's why I asked about, so there seems to be some specific rules as it relates to housing. And it's going to require legislation. And I just raise all this because I think it's something that this body probably needs to consider. It will probably be more than a year. And so there's going to be some virtual meetings that the city attorney and I and Jason are probably involved in, developing this lease agreement that will be something in the magnitude of 3 to 5 years. We'll have language addressing the possibility of legislation. It's going to take a legislative act to dispose of the armory. And
Well, that kind of goes with what I was looking at, but although you could argue that a shelter is affordable housing.
That's what I was going to argue, right? Is that, that there's forms of housing oftentimes that are at shelters that are beyond an emergency. So we could have an expansion project.
well, so there will be, to meet basically what I understood is for disposition, for the legislation, we'll have commitments. If it goes to the city, we have commitments to the city for the reasons it would be being disposed for. So just so and I raise all this as the city council will be considering if it gets disposed, what would its use be? That may be defined by the legislature. Because that's confining, because this is state property, which if they dispose of it, this is the similar, it has to have housing. So basically I was told it has to have a housing component of it.
Find
That's
that
the
section now.
surplus land act that they're following. there.
Well, it is, but now I want to find that. Buried in here somewhere.
Well, I just raise it as other matters that this came up
Here it is.
after the agenda went out.
The exemption is surplus land that is a former military base that was conveyed by the federal government to a local agency and is subject to Article 8, commencing with 33492.1125 of Chapter 4 of the Health and Safety Code. Provided that all of the following conditions are met, the former military base has an aggregate area greater than 5 acres, is expected to include a mix of residential and non-residential uses, and is expected to include no fewer than 1,400 residential units upon completion of redevelopment. That is the exempt surplus property definition. That's an exclusion that's a definition of an exemption is that.
It's not federal property estate.
Yeah, well, it was previously federal. That's kind of it went from the feds to the state to where a local agency is what it kind of sounds like.
Yeah, but I think I'm a forward example. Here you have, this is
going directly from feds to the city. I see what you're saying.
So this is state to city.
Yeah. But even this, it wouldn't fall into there, right?
No.
It wouldn't, because it wouldn't meet that exemption.
It's right at 5 acres.
Yeah.
I kind of, it might be just trying to remember. It's right at 5 acres. I can't remember if it's just beneath or just above.
The crazy thing is I don't understand. Well, and maybe it must be a federal, because the state could make the same argument we can, which is we're not, I guess they insist whenever they dispose of it, they're going to call it, well, they're selling it. That's why it's not just a lease. If they were going to long-term lease it to us, they could probably do the same thing we're doing.
Correct,
They could decide that a shelter isn't in their powers and give the long-term
Well,
lease.
let me come to the chase.
Yeah.
Azusa, there was an armory in Azusa. These are one of the things that count the city of Azusa took it on, and it's a youth center. It's a recreation center, basketball, it's a youth center. But it doesn't, I don't know that you could do that today.
Yeah.
Given the housing.
Oh, no, it was, yeah.
And that's my point.
The overarching
the
primary purpose is for affordable
As
housing.
the state disposes of if its property, how it is used is much more restricted. And essentially was told if it gets disposed to the city, it's in the legislation, it will say we're gonna have to define the housing purpose. It has to have a housing purpose. Now, I can't tell you that incorporates all 5 acres. Because the armory itself sits on about a third of the 5 acre. About 2/3 of the site is vacant. I don't know how or how.
Yeah, I would say more likely because they're gonna surplus it. So they would probably put that requirement on all of it, John.
I don't know.
I'm just being.
These are the nuances. I'm just saying she was very specific. It is in the legislation, because this isn't going to follow the normal disposition. Usually there's a list, and this one being subject to disposition is somewhere in the middle. But it can move separately by legislation, which if it does go to the city.
So if we make it a shelter and housing, that's what you're getting at.
So what if it's like, it's transitional housing, right? I mean,
And shelter and transitional housing.
I'm raising this, given that there's going to be
Conversation.
it's going to be a lease, not a license agreement.
Right.
And And it's gonna be administered by DGS, not by the military department. So it's gonna be different than what we are under.
In the meantime, but that's a correction though. That's a side, separate and apart from any ultimate disposal of the property.
Yes, and
No, but this lease agreement will speak to that process and will have contingency language for show legislation, which I anticipate legislation.
Then it can be
introduced,
transferred. Okay, so it'd
transferred
be
to
like,
the city,
okay,
but that will also stipulate how the property be used to meet housing.
okay.
Rob, you have anything you'd like to say?
A lot.
A lot. I don't know how you figure this stuff out.
Maria? There's good day.
Well, it gets to the conversation that's happening, looking at how, if you have this facility, which was being poorly maintained, and it's serving a critical purpose right now of providing emergency shelter, for those that don't have it. And we're directing people to that to provide shelter. And as we now walk into, the winter season and having warming centers that is available. So, and so as you have this, it is not, we are heard definitively that the National Guard has no use of this facility. They have reassigned their personnel to Apple Valley and they're done. So, but if it would probably sit vacant for the next 10, 15 years till eventually it got, on their list of disposal, unless there is particular legislation introduced that would
Expedite that
Expedite
with the
that.
conditions that are
Yeah.
required for it.
that, and it's anticipated that would take about 3 to 5 years just in an expedited.
That's the expedited.
That's the expedited.
Yes.
But in there, it allow, so part of this would be to allow for improvements,
Yeah.
recognizing that through this, so just.
We could treat it as if it's ours, if we have an agreement that has a plan for it being ours.
Yes.
And in the forecasting for the winter season, they're forecasting that we're going to be heavy on the wet side of the storms.
Yes, 71% of El Nino in this area.
Yeah.
Dumping, if you go to the river, they're dumping water out of the lake to try to get it to the levels that they need to be at because they're not there
Oh, gosh, there's just so much.
Maybe it would be good if we could get a little familiar with what are the housing component expectations? What is that?
I'm sure the state will let us know when they figure it
Yeah,
out.
I'll-
So-
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not,
I
only they
okay,
yet.
because I was like, then we can build ideas.
About working with the
What,
state.
what is in writing and being sure that the city attorney and Jason are
Exactly.
familiar with, so they can see how this conversation.
Where they're
is-
coming from would be good.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's gonna, so.
Any other thoughts, any other concerns to be brought to the table for the good of the order here?
How's the audit going? Oh, I'm sorry to ask.
Okay.
Sorry to ask.
Whoa, okay.
Not good, huh?
Uh-huh,
We have new auditors, so that's always,
that's why.
and even they say, we just do things, even with the same company, we do things a little bit different.
That's what they said.
Yeah.
Thank you for that report, Maria. I'm just kidding, All right, so we will be bringing back the fair, the Porterville self-worth and updates for the process for the community events. And let's talk about our next meeting, because the next meeting, if the 22nd is the day before Thanksgiving, so look at November the 29th. And I'm going to propose we go dark in December and resume in January.
Okay. That should be fine.
November 29th for our next meeting. We go dark in December. How about January 24th or January 31st? Whichever you're comfortable with, so we can at least get it scheduled.
I have nothing on my.
When is it? I'm sorry, January what?
24 or January the 31st. Those
Oh.
are Wednesdays. I like to have it on Julia's schedule.
I'm okay either of those Wednesdays because there's a fourth and a fifth Wednesday of the month, so those are both free.
So we go to the 24th then? January
Sure.
24th. All right. Let me just reiterate, November the 29th for our next meeting. And dark in December, resume in 2024 on January the 24th.
Okay.
Okay. With that being said, it is 5:06. This meeting is adjourned. Are we still on?